Have you had to pay more for your groceries? Are you experiencing food shortages or hearing about them in the news where you live? Then you can begin to relate with the millions of our brothers and sisters around the world who are experiencing hunger, who don't know where their next meal is coming from. If you would like to better understand this very critical issue of world hunger, then please join me and my colleagues in the next half hour because we will be unpacking this very important subject in the next 30 minutes. We'll be talking about what is world hunger? Why is it getting worse? And most importantly, what can we do about it? Welcome to Changemakers Live. Get smart about world hunger. I'm Alexis Rodrigo from the Strategic Communications team of World Vision Canada. And here's my co host, Karen Luz.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Karen Luz, and yes, each month we'll be diving into a different global issue featuring one of our field experts at World Vision. This is Changemakers Lives, and you are tuning in to our very first episode. Today's guest, in light of World Hunger Day coming up, has a lot of extensive experience in addressing issues of hunger and malnutrition. Maereg Tafere is trained in environmental management with more than 27 years of experience in international development in Africa. He worked for World Vision in different roles, including humanitarian, development, and peace building programs, also doing research, and has held leadership roles in multiple East African countries. He has lots of experience in programs focused on addressing issues of hunger and malnutrition. And currently, he works for World Vision Canada as a program manager responsible for programs in West and East Africa, and also participates in the organization's various working groups. We're excited to learn from him today about this dire issue. Welcome, Maereg.
Hi, Merrick.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I'm glad to be with you today.
So
Okay.
let's jump right into it. Let's start by making sure we're all on the same page. When we say the word hunger, what exactly do we mean by that, Mary? Is there a technical definition that we're following? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. It's really unfortunate that we have to talk about hunger in the 21st century. I mean, we have conquered the space. We have advanced technologically, but still we have to talk about the very basic thing, whether people are able to get food or not. So in terms of the definition, hunger is not actually a technical definition. We have a number of other technical definitions we use to express the lack of food, but this is an expression that everybody uses. We even use it daily basis when we skip a meal or we were not able to eat food for some planned reason or unplanned reason. So in simple words, hunger is the distress that we feel in relation to lack of food. It's not only distress of physical feeling that we feel when we feel hungry, but it is also an emotional stress. If you are hungry for a reason and, on a planned basis, you may not be psychologically stressed. But imagine if you were to be hungry day in, day out. You don't know where the next meal is coming from. So it's not only a physical stress, but it is also a psychological stress. The technical terminology we use related to hunger is normally food insecurity. Yeah, basically it comes from families not being able to produce enough food if they are farmers, or families not having enough income to buy groceries from a shop. If you have groceries in a shop, and in many countries in the southern hemisphere, we may not even have groceries with varieties of food. So hunger is about stress in terms of lack of food, in terms of quantity. The minimum quantity that a person needs to take is about 1,800 kilocalorie per day. And this is simply the quantity in terms of energy. There is also the quality type because we need the vitamins and minerals, for proper functioning of our body. So this is basically a term that we use to describe how we feel when we lack food. But when we talk about world hunger, we are not talking about the temporary hunger here. We're talking about the long-term hunger that causes physical and psychological distress. So I think to start with, let's start with this one.
Thank you so much for that really thorough explanation about the nuances around the term hunger and how it's not just like a passing feeling. We know that world hunger exists across the world and it can be very nuanced as to what contributes to it. So we'd like to hear from you about what causes world hunger. What are some factors that are involved in creating such a crisis?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, we should say hunger is about poverty. Yeah, by the way, we have hungry people almost everywhere. The reason why we focus in certain geographies is because of the statistics or the number of people who go hungry. But even in Canada, we have hungry people. Relatively speaking, there are people who can't have enough food. So the reason is basically poverty, but the reasons behind poverty are multiple. There are those global issues, like for example, um, places that are ridden with conflict, communities cannot do their daily jobs. So that becomes one reason for hunger. Or climate change that affects, the process of food production. This is the case especially in the tropics, where Africa, Asia, and Latin America are located. They don't necessarily create the climate change. They contribute, but they contribute less. The major contributors of climate change are the industrialized countries, but nonetheless, they get affected by that too. And there are diseases that come from time to time, like COVID has affected us for the past 2 years, and food production has been hampered in many ways globally. Income has reduced because businesses were not running as usual. So imagine if you were a poor living on a marginal income and you were to be sick, or because of such kind of sicknesses, business is going to go bad. There's no way you could find the income to buy food because poor people don't have access to banks and they don't have a lot of connections where they can borrow money from. And at household levels, there are a lot of other reasons. A family may have land, but the land could be very small or very marginal that doesn't produce a lot. Or there could be more children in a house than can support the income or the agriculture can support. And there could be disease or sickness of the breadwinner, and there could be marginalization of certain communities in some locations. For some reason, they don't get the necessary inputs or the necessary tools to produce, or they don't have access to employment because they are not properly trained, the kind of training that is required to earn you enough for your family. So the reasons are multiple, but generally speaking, it's poverty, and poverty is exacerbated by many other factors. But to start with, I think we can define it this way.
Now, we've also been hearing, actually, World Vision is one of those that are raising the alarm that the Ukraine conflict can make world hunger worse. Can you explain for us, Mary, what is the connection between what's happening in Ukraine with the rest of the world? Why is that situation making world hunger worse?
Yeah, any conflict anywhere would affect the process of production and supply chain. Normally food is not produced by every family. It has to come from somewhere. So you need peace in order to transport, export, and then store it, and then buy and take it home for consumption. That's why I said conflict is one of the reasons for world hunger. What is special about Ukraine and Russia is that both countries put together make around 39% of the market of wheat and fertilizer. And this is at global level. So it's a huge, huge amount. So because of the war, the supply chain has been disrupted. They are not exporting food as they used to in the past. And it's not only about the food they produce this year, but they can't also export fertilizer to help other countries use them to produce more food for now and for the future. So it's a serious challenge. You can imagine, how the price of fuel has been affected because of the war of Ukraine. Here in Canada, the price of fuel has almost doubled. So it's the same thing globally. It has a significant impact, especially in Africa. Most of African countries import their wheat and their fertilizer from Ukraine or Russia. So this is going to further strain the food production process and also the market of food in those countries.
Hmm. And moving into the impact on a specific community, what are the effects of hunger and food insecurity on children in particular? And why is it urgent that we address the crisis right now?
Yeah. Hunger affects everybody because we need food to survive. But for children, it's very critical. Children are growing at a higher rate than adults. And at that grows age, if you don't have the right quantity and the right quality of food, your physical and mental development is going to be limited. So the burden of hunger is mainly on children and on women who are pregnant or lactating. So let's look at some of the statistics, for example. Um, the overall people with insufficient food are about 2.4 billion people globally. This is almost a third or maybe a fourth of the global population. And of them, we are talking about children being around 328 million. This is a statistics I got from WFP from 2019. So yes, the total number of people who don't have adequate food is high, but in terms of proportion, the number of children is really, really, really high. Because even though the total number is 2.4 billion, the critically affected are 821 million. Out of the 821 million, 328 are children. So you can see how it affects children. We have 45 million children, severely affected by hunger, which when I say severely, it means any simple disease can take a toll on them. It can create some medical complications. And the statistics says that about 3 million of them die every year. So you can imagine how difficult it is really for children. On top of that, about 50% of the deaths of children is related to some sort of hunger or undernourishment. And about 20 million of children are born with low weight, which means it's going to mess up with their health and their physical and mental development. So hunger uniquely affects children because of the rate of growth they require. And not only that, in many communities in the Southern Hemisphere, children are fed after the adults. So if a family has less food in the house, children are most likely going to be ignored, and as a result, would be very much affected by hunger.
Is there a gender component to that too, Marig? Like, are boy children more likely to receive more food than the girls?
Yes, gender also comes into play, not only in consumption, in overall access to economic development. Women are um, disadvantaged when it comes to ownership of land in some countries. Men are the only ones allowed to have land, so women may not have land. If they have land, they may not have, the traction power to work in farmlands and produce adequately. And women are also, marginalized in many communities. They may not be able to go out and have business to earn income. So generally, poverty has a gender lens. It affects women. It mainly affects girls as well, because girls, as we already mentioned it, as children, they need more food, but that may not be the case. Boys would be favored. If there is shortage all the time, the ones that are disadvantaged are women and girls in a household, unfortunately.
Right. And the girls are the ones who grow up to become the mothers.
Yep.
So if they're malnourished to begin with, it becomes, this vicious cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next question, by the way, just wanted to encourage those who are watching, even if you're watching the recording of this stream, please, if you have any questions for Maereg and the rest of the World Vision team, please post them in the comments below this video. And if we don't get to them during the live broadcast, we will respond to your comment. Okay. Do you have any other questions for Maereg, KL?
Um, no, I just want to say that this has been a really insightful first 15 minutes of an issue that I definitely am still learning a lot about, especially with the nuances of everything.
Yeah. So I think a very important question that we all have is what can we do about this problem? It just sounds like such a massive problem. It's affecting a significant proportion of the human population, and it has both immediate and long-term effects. So, Mary, we don't want to be helpless. Tell us, what can we do?
Yeah, well, the statistics could be daunting and discouraging to some extent, but I think there has been a lot of progress in the past, especially from 2000 onwards up to 2015. There was a significant reduction in the number of people going hungry. But unfortunately, starting from 2017, aggravated by the COVID disease recently, poverty in general and the number of people going hungry is increasing. I think we need to reverse that, and we have the capacity to do so. By the way, there is no shortage of food production globally. We produce excess. In some countries, we actually throw away food. The problem is the distribution. There is more in some places, there is no or very less in some other places. So what we can do is to be aware of the situation globally. Canadians, we need to understand that even though we may have enough food, even though we can buy food anytime we want because we have money in our pockets, we need to remember that there are a number of people, billions of people, who lack that opportunity. So the first thing is understanding the scale of the problem. The other thing we can do is we talked about the factors aggravating poverty. They are climate change, natural disasters, etc. They all come from what we actually do. And Canadians can talk to their government and influence their policy to reduce climate change, the impacts of climate change, so that the people living in the tropics couldn't continue suffering and children suffering as a result. They can also advocate by contacting, their officials to contribute to the reduction of poverty, because, Canada has a global responsibility to contribute to that, and I think we can do a lot in terms of advocacy. And what we can do at personal level is also very important. I mean, understanding the situation is good. Advocating on behalf of the people is also good, but we can also contribute to organizations that are trying to address issues of hunger, and there are so many of them, including World Vision. So I would like to encourage us that We are not helpless. There's enough food, so we need to do our part by contributing and helping those organizations that are dealing with world hunger.
Thank you. I see a question in the chat. So, what are some of the innovations or technologies over the last number of years that have been a game changer to help fight hunger and drought in the global south? I'd love to hear more about what's been going on from the field and how the how programs and tools have changed over the years to address the crisis.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And actually, this is not something we can address it within a few minutes, but just to give a hint, lack of food production or not being able to produce enough in the southern hemisphere is based on so many things. The first thing is the land size we have is very small. So if we want to produce enough, we need to use the land intensively. And in order to use it intensively, we need to use the help of technology. But the very challenge we have in some countries, like for example in Africa, is climate change has made it so difficult for rain to be irregular and also for frequent droughts. So technologies that deal with using underground water for agriculture is one of the best ways to address the issues. But this takes a lot of technology, a lot of capital. It's capital intensive. Our farmers are so poor, they can't afford to dig a well of 100 meter or so, and then cover the cost of extraction to farm. So some projects are helping to promote that, and that is one thing. Other technologies and simple ones are, using gardening in small farms, as long as there is water, basically, dealing with new seeds, new varieties of seeds, like in many countries, GMOs are not allowed, but there are a number of countries that allow genetically modified seeds to be used because you can produce more in a small area of land. So there are a number of innovations that are being introduced, but because of the lower level of education of the community in the southern hemisphere and lack of capital, those technologies are not being exploited to a full extent. But there are examples of projects.
By the way, to those who are watching, if you feel moved to support World Vision's work on the ground to address world hunger, you can go to the link in the comments and make a donation through that link. Any other questions, Gail? Do we have any others coming in? Or did you
Yeah,
have a follow-up?
yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, ask a question about, I guess, the background because you mentioned, Maereg, earlier that we don't have an issue of not having enough food in the world, and we have in some places an overproduction of food. I'd love to know just a little bit. I know we only have a couple minutes, but just a little bit of insight as to historically what contributed to the unequal distribution across the world.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, there are so many reasons. Um, Starting, from the time of colonization, um, up to now, there are several reasons as to why this is the case. But mainly, I think the tropical areas live under a very variable climate, and the population in those areas grew to an extent where they cannot live on a small piece of land if they don't use other technologies. So, like California is an arid area, exactly probably the same as Africa, and even worse than some countries in Africa in terms of aridity. But they are able to invest on irrigation, and use mechanization to increase production. That is not the case in the southern hemisphere because there is lack of technology, lack of capital, and lack of large farmlands like the ones in California, because there are small landholders in the land in Africa and other countries is held by small landholders, very small, and that combined with the lack of rain in those areas is a reason. Like in Europe, Canada, or America, the frequency of rain that we receive is huge compared to Africa. Many countries in Africa get rain only for 3 months, and that's the time window of opportunity for them to produce, and that is affected by several other factors. It could be lack of inputs, or lack of peace, or any other sort of disruption. So the inequality is a result of so many things. And as you mentioned earlier, there is the gender lens, there is the discrepancy in terms of land distribution in those areas. So it's a multiple. There are multiple factors for that.
I
Mhm.
also have a follow-up question. I'm not sure if we have time. Maybe we might just have one more minute, Maereg, but you mentioned uh, communities needing more inputs in order to produce more food. But what is World Vision doing to help families that don't own any land at all on which to grow food or to raise livestock?
Yeah. Well, in order to get enough food and to go, not hungry, you don't have to be a farmer. We are not farmers, for example. We earn and then we buy food from the supermarket. So the other alternative we promote is building businesses, supporting businesses. But there is a lot of shortage of capital in the villages where we work. The markets are very small, and the capacity of people to buy is very small. But nonetheless, World Vision tries to build businesses by giving trainings for women, trainings for marginalized communities, trainings for those who don't own land but have to survive nonetheless. And we even provide credit and loans to communities so that they can start businesses. So those really help, especially women and many other communities who don't own land.
All right. Thank you so much for answering our questions and the questions of the people in our audience. To those at home, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first episode of Changemakers Live. And a big thank you to Maereg for joining us today. I definitely learned a lot about the issue of world hunger, and I really appreciated how you explained the nuance and the interconnectivity of this issue, and how solutions have to be oriented towards addressing things like the gender lens on poverty. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And do join us in the next episode of Changemakers Live. We'll be talking about the issue of refugees, another very big issue that's affecting the world. So thanks again, and see you next time.
From all of us at
Bye
World
bye.